Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first State of the Wholesale Supply Chain Industry webinar. I want to thank you for taking your time out of your busy day to join us. In late 2017, we conducted a survey asking NAW wholesalers and distributors about key initiatives to support your organization's inventory and supply chain planning operations in 2018. We've taken your input and developed a report, and this webinar outlines what leading-edge companies are doing to compete in today's ultra-competitive landscape. It also includes some tips on how to tweak your inventory optimization operations to ensure you thrive in 2018. But first things first, our job today is to empower you with information that makes your job easier. And while you'll notice that this webinar is hosted by Blue Ridge, this is not a Blue Ridge commercial. Let me repeat that one more time, guys. This isn't a Blue Ridge commercial. It's not a vendor slideshow. What we want to do is give you some info on what we do at the end of the presentation, but we're squarely focused on delivering actionable insights to help you add certainty, speed, and assurance to your supply chain operations. At the end of this presentation, we'll take a few, depending on time, we'll take the opportunity to answer a few questions. So in the Q&A section there, if you have a question, please enter it, and we'll queue those questions. And like I said, depending on time, we'll try to get to all of them. We'll definitely jump on a few of them. So I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'm Todd Craig, and I've had the opportunity to spend the past 20 years in the supply chain industry. I've spent some time on both sides of the aisle, supply chain execution and supply chain planning. And I think that gives me what I think is a unique vantage point of the supply chain, really understanding the holistic nature of it. Most recently, I was the product director for Oracle Cloud Logistics Solutions. And like I said, today I have the distinct pleasure of running marketing for Blue Ridge. Joining me today is the founder of Blue Ridge, Greg White. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Todd. This has been an interesting endeavor for us because this has been a long time coming. So give you a little bit about how we got here. I originally came out of industry from distribution and then eventually in retail. Worked for a few different technology companies, but I consider myself a domain expert first and a technologist second. The way that we have come to develop our theory, our philosophies, our approach, and our technology is by using and building and implementing hundreds of traditional solutions to the wholesale industry. Essentially, the way that what we've done here at Blue Ridge is just to build the solution that we always wanted to have. So I can't say no to myself, unlike the IT department at many of the distributors that I've worked at or worked with, and I'm sure you can all empathize with that condition. And a lot of companies have and continue to benefit from this new perspective in your industry. So we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the industry, how companies are dealing with the marketplace today.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg, for joining us. So let's talk about the survey a little bit. So how do we conduct the survey? So in order to better analyze the current state of the wholesale supply chain industry and understand its biggest challenges, we surveyed more than 100 NAW Smart Brief readers on the challenges they are facing in 2018, with respondents including CEOs, chief operating officers, presidents, managers, and sales managers. The results encompass the thinking of a variety of top executives working in different parts of the supply chain sector. The survey consisted of 15 questions that helped us compile the following data and the corresponding report. All right, so let's set up the premise of the survey. And like I said, the corresponding report. Like many other industries, the wholesale supply chain sector is undergoing massive changes in how business is conducted. The rise of online e-commerce wholesalers means having the products where customers, when they want them exactly, and more important, that's more important than ever. Other factors, including increased use of digital technology, complex patterns of customer demand, and demand volatility, are also presenting challenges for supply chain managers. These trends are going to continue throughout 2018 and beyond. And by this chart we're looking at right here, according to Needham research, Amazon's dominance is only increasing, and they're accounting for about 34% of online sales in the US in 2017, and that's expected to grow to about 50% by 2021. You know, with these statistics, we wanted to see how modern wholesalers and distributors are adapting their inventory and supply chain planning operations to compete with Amazon's and other e-commerce giants while becoming consumer focused.
There's no doubt that Amazon is really the most venerable force in commerce. They're not just competing with distributors and not just with retailers and not just in traditional markets. And yet they're not the only one. And because we're speaking to a global audience today, it's arguable that they're not even the largest one, depending on the part of the world that you operate in. So there's no doubt that people are coming for the distribution and wholesale business. And companies have to keep their head up, their eyes open, and have a global perspective in order to be able to maintain their competitiveness.
Awesome. So let's dive into the key findings of the survey. Some findings were surprising. For example, 50% of respondents didn't feel they were in direct competition with Amazon or other online wholesalers, despite the site's dominance and expected growth. You know, as Greg alluded to, and as we're alluding to here, we'll tackle that one in a minute and into a deeper conversation. But unsurprisingly, the top priorities for executives included increasing revenue growth, improving productivity, and posting greater cash flows, all of which demand organizations and ways to be more efficient. So let's jump into the key findings. They include increasingly complex demand patterns are causing firms to hold more inventory, but that's not translating into increased customer service. Many companies continue to struggle with how to forecast and manage promotions. I think there's a lot of people today who are dealing with that. We hear that on a day-to-day basis. 3, forecasting techniques most commonly used by wholesalers are often outdated and lack integration of more advanced data analytics. And number 4, finally, you know, wholesalers and distributors continue to struggle with cross-departmental collaboration.
Yeah, I think considering what the study has found, there are a number of things that companies need to do. One is they've got to make sure that they're very efficient. They know that their niche marketplace, they know and predict their customer. So we're going to talk a little bit about forecasting the customer when we go through some of these other elements. But one of the things that Amazon does that really makes them stand out is that they don't forecast items. And let me repeat that. They don't forecast items. So think about whatever is on your desk or table in front of you right now. We often say things like, this item is growing, or this item has a seasonal pattern, or this item is very volatile. In truth, the item is just a surrogate for the customer activity that we're really trying to predict. So if you think about forecasting as forecasting the customer or the customer's activity rather than forecasting items, then you've already made a huge leap. And that is the leap that Amazon made some years ago. Anyone who's ever bought on any website, but certainly on Amazon, recognizes that they are trying to direct you to do certain things from the site, from their adverts on the web, and possibly even in the shopping cart. So you have to recognize that. In order to capitalize on that, you have to use forecasting techniques, segmented forecasting techniques that really allow you to break down all these patterns and understand these patterns, and to get the kind of results counter to what Todd was talking about, where people are forecasting and carrying more inventory and yet not performing better. You have to turn that forecast into a precision plan that enables you to share information intra and inter-enterprise to perform at a higher level.
So segueing into that, I mean, you know, we're going to spend a little more time talking about Amazon here, but we asked the question, like we said, do you view Amazon or other e-commerce giants as direct competition in your marketplace? And 50% of the respondents don't feel they're in direct competition. Greg, you know, you've started already, right? I know you've got some strong thoughts on this subject. Even more, But remember, we've only got like 35
Right.
minutes here, so.
I'll keep it short and simple. So Todd, you know I do frequent speaking engagements where I talk about the state of wholesale, the state of the supply chain, Amazon, commerce in general, and things like that. And it's stunning to me that repeatedly I see this as a response. And I have to say, even considering my anecdotal evidence, I was surprised to see that so many people answered no to that. My initial response is to the fact that you don't think Amazon is a competitor, if you believe that, you need to wake up. It's as simple as that. Amazon is everyone's competitor. They are distribution's competitor. They are retail's competitor. They are drug, wholesale, and retail's competitor. They are real estate's competitor. They are web services competitor. They are now UPS and FedEx direct competitors, and they will become a bigger competitor in the days to come. Often I hear companies say things like, I'm sorry to harp on this, but I have to drive this point home because companies have to recognize this. They can't conceive a world where Amazon can do what they do. I was talking to a $50 million HVAC distributor, and he said, I can't conceive a world where Amazon could know enough about the product and service the warranty as well as we could. And the I can't conceive a world is exactly the problem. If you can't conceive a world where Amazon is your competitor, you need to change your perspective, because it would be easy enough for them to take that competitive advantage away from a company by simply buying them. They have unlimited funds. They have their own currency. So there's nothing that is, no specialization that is untouchable. So the first thing that companies have to do is they have to admit it, then accept it, then adapt and evolve in order to be able to compete here. So end of diatribe on that topic. But I think that's something that companies need to recognize.
Well, let's talk about adapting and evolving there, Greg. So we then asked our survey takers what challenges they were facing in inventory planning and forecasting. And inventory management continues to be a multifaceted topic for supply chain managers, particularly when it comes to meeting demand. Of those surveyed, 37.4% said their biggest challenge in the next 3 years would be complex demand patterns. That was closely followed by 30.6% of the respondents indicating that demand volatility from new competitors, customers, and digital e-commerce would be their biggest challenge. Greg, what does this tell us about the current planning and forecasting environment?
Well, so this is not news to any of us who've been in the industry for any time. And Todd, you alluded to it before, and that is promotion, new products, and long lead times are the big issues in the marketplace. And that has a lot to do with how companies have responded to those factors, which is to historically analyze what the effect of a promotion was last year, this time last year, or last season, or a month ago, or whatever that time frame might have been, and then use that, just simply that number, we got an uplift of 50%, as the model for the next promotion. If there's no further data available, then that's simply what I call postcasting.
Yeah.
So one company that comes immediately to mind is a large candy and sweets and snacks distributor. And they've actually started using techniques where they are actually forecasting their customers, because the promotions for AMC Theater is different than NCG Theaters or Regal Cinemas or whoever it is, or the promotional means and the distribution and sales methodologies are different for Lowe's versus Home Depot, whoever that is. And they can recognize that and recognize the impact of promotions on different customers. And the definition of promotion has changed also. The volatility that you're talking about, the 37.4 and the 30.6, the increasing volatility, those two things go to the fact that what we used to call a promotion was a change in price, a temporary change in price. But now promotion is much, much more sophisticated. And it could be simply a higher level of awareness on the web, through your sales force, in the marketplace in general, Super Bowl ads, you know, any sort of promotion that highlights a particular product.
Right.
And because those are less and less in the control of the distributor, it's harder and harder to grasp those. But again, if we're capturing and analyzing every customer transaction, that enables the ability to more easily tie those efforts into demand.
That's good stuff.
What that does is it allows you to have a lot less manual intervention in the sales forecast, because the reason that so many people in so many roles get involved in the sales process is because the data is a lump. There's not a lot of inherent intelligence in it based on the transaction with the customer.
Good deal. So, Greg, in response to these challenges, companies are holding higher inventory levels. We've established that to meet volatile, increasing demand. So we asked folks, you know, what was your current day of supplies on hand? And of those surveyed, 34.3% held 31 to 60 days of inventory. An additional 30% held more than 61 days of supply. When you combine the current days of inventory on hand here, like with the previous insight into inventory and forecasting challenges, what stands out to you there when you combine the two?
The thing that jumps out is the amount of inventory that's being held in many cases, and this is experiential as well as reflected in this data, in many cases seemingly arbitrarily. If we hold more inventory, we'll make more sales, or the inverse, we'll lose fewer sales, right? We'll walk fewer customers, we'll fulfill better. You know, what we're seeing, and that's reflected in the data, is that that's not so true, that companies are holding more and more inventory and yet not fulfilling at the rate that they would expect. And we're going to talk about the fulfillment shortly. But there's always been this myth, and it's been perpetrated by the market, where rising inventories at distribution means something good for the economy. And often that's generally true, but it's not a direct correlation. And that a lot of the issue has to do with the fact that we so often focus on forecasting, you could argue misfocus or focus too much on forecasting, and don't focus enough on a precision plan. A plan for inventory that not only follows the forecast, but also reflects the realities of our supply chain environment, what our lead times are, how often we purchase from our suppliers, what our investment opportunities vis-a-vis for buying and things like that exist in our supply chain environment. Those are all things that should be measured, they should be planned for, they should be rationalized, and they should be understood in terms of analysis of our inventory. So it's not 31 to 60 days, it's 17 days of lead time, it's 30 days of cover for order frequency, and it's 15 days of investment inventory where we got a heck of a deal at the end of the last quarter, right? So we need to break down and segment the inventory and understand that as well as we do the forecast.
Good, good. All right, Greg, for many years in the supply chain, we alluded to this earlier, right? Managing promotions is a huge challenge. And often companies aren't using the right techniques to plan, account, and manage those promotions. Even though they're prevalent, they've been running them for years, right? But they're not using appropriate techniques or sophisticated data analysis to understand promotions. Instead, they're running them on instinct and past experiences. When we asked about current forecasting techniques, the majority of respondents indicated that they use older techniques such as historical sales data, almost 85% there, and moving averages, 72%, to predict demand. That contrasts with only 5% of respondents saying they used advanced machine learning techniques and artificial intelligence to forecast demand. So Greg, with over 84% of respondents indicating that they were using historical sales data to forecast demand, what could they be overlooking? And I guess, you know, another way of asking it is not just what are they overlooking, but is there a better way?
I think I think these companies are a victim of generalization as much as anything. So a lot of the techniques we've adapted in distribution have been a variation of where most of the study in supply chain goes, because most of the money in supply chain is, and that's manufacturing techniques. And because manufacturers never touch the end consumer, the end customer, they always produce their goods and send it to a distributor or a retailer to get into the hands of the end customer. They have to use this great lump of data that they get that either comes from the distributors or mass market or accumulated data, but distributors have their hands on the customer. And they don't need to be confined to these methodologies because historical sales is literally as simple as looking at what happened last year and saying, that's going to happen this year, plus or minus 10%. And that's often applied to every item or every item in a category or families of items and that sort of thing. Moving averages, time series and adaptive series, and even regression models, those are simply stochastic techniques that attempt to more effectively estimate what last year's sales mean for this year. I call that postcasting. It's like looking at what happened yesterday and expecting the same thing to happen today. And it is valuable within a range, and we all know that that range is very, very broad. But because distribution is in a unique place in the marketplace of actually laying hands on the customer, they can capitalize on analyzing that transaction with the customer. And this is something that we need to transition in the marketplace, particularly in retail and particularly in distribution and wholesale, is to use that transaction with the customer to learn more and forecast better, and that becomes the input that allows us to use machine learning and AI and deep learning tools.
Makes sense.
You can't use those more advanced tools with a lump of you sold 6.
Right.
You have to know Todd bought 1, Greg bought 5, and maybe even some influential factors tied to that transaction, which you can discern, that allow you to know why, not just how much, but why the customer bought.
I like the term postcasting there. There'll be a marketing piece coming up on that soon, but
it's been used many times.
All right. So we then asked which demand factors are incorporated into your forecast models. And the factors included in these demand forecasts also reflect the need for a more sophisticated approach, kind of what we've been talking about here. So only 12.9% of supply chain managers incorporate external influences like social media into their forecasts, leaving a valuable source of information out of the model. Greg, when you combine the current techniques and types of demand factors users are incorporating here in this chart, in this response data, what are your thoughts?
This is encouraging that these demand factors are utilized. Again, I'm going to harp on the fact that today we try to extract value from a lump that doesn't directly identify these segments of demand. We have to extract it from you sold 6. As we have recognized that this is happening, and as we enable distributors to utilize that data, I hope everybody's getting this. I want you to use your customer transactions to forecast. Does everyone get that? As we recognize that the best place to capture the indicators of demand that are represented on this chart is at that transaction, and as more companies come to the ability to at least capture that data and analyze it, if not, use their current technologies to process and forecast and segment it into rational forecasts. If we at least capture that data, then we have it for when we adapt to a technology that allows us to do this. This was the biggest revelation, of my career, was recognizing why we can't predict, why forecasting is so volatile, right? Why we can't figure out what items are doing. And the revelation that I came to was we're not trying to figure out what items are doing. We're trying to figure out what customers are doing.
complete sense. So next, we asked respondents if their inventory planning processes provided actionable insights. And most companies indicated that they use the moving average and basic time series forecasting for predicting future inventory levels. These are measures that have been used for the past 50 years because they're easy to compute and understand. Most firms use historical sales patterns to predict future sales, just as you said. So, you know, the recent past dictates the future. But Greg, can you discuss the impact of promotions or other external factors here that might be overlooked?
Yeah, I mean, the portion of a promotion or other factors that is overlooked is again the why. It's the why and how it impacted demand, not just the how much. And that again is really difficult to do from extracting it from a lump of data. Again, if you are using a stochastic technique to analyze your data, you've already acquiesced to the notion that you can't really know why demand occurred. You just know how much demand occurred, and you want to estimate how much demand has occurred. So if we want to utilize the available data, we've got to change the way that we communicate, capture, process, and then ultimately forecast against it. And as importantly, you have to know how that lives in your unique supply chain environment. Okay, so our forecast is off by a certain percentage. What does that mean to our plan? And a lot of companies are using and should use a sound planning mechanism to compensate for the fact that that forecast is inevitably inaccurate. No matter how much you segment or how close you get to the customer, it will ultimately be somewhat deficient. And you have to have the planning segment of the solution enable you to accommodate that. But promotions are not going away. In fact, they're becoming a bigger and bigger part of commerce every single day. So we have to be able to accommodate that.
So let's stay on, you mentioned the word communication, right? Communication always leads to collaboration. So on to the next question. Which additional roles are involved in the inventory optimization process? And the majority of those surveyed involved sales at just about 75% and operations at 63% when they were optimizing inventory. And this was in addition to the buyers and the planners. While having a multitude of perspectives is important, many are finding they don't have the necessary collaboration tools to achieve the full benefit of using advanced technology or forecasting techniques. And I guess, you know, Greg, that leads us to two-part question here. What's the right mix of roles that should be involved in inventory optimization? And then part two, what kind of processes need to be in place to make this a repeatable and successful process?
Yeah, so the good news is that the roles that are identified here should all, to some extent, be involved in the process. They need to be enabled appropriately. For instance, let me just state before I go on any further, I have performed in the sales, operations, merchandising, forecasting, and marketing roles, not finance.
They wouldn't let you there?
They would not, and rightfully so. So when I say this, recognize that it's from experience, personal experience, and it's no reflection on anyone who might be in those roles today. But salespeople, as I said, I've been one, and merchandising people are possibly the worst people to participate in the process. We have to provide them with more intelligence and data because they are artists, is the term that I use, more than scientists. And what we need to do is we need to rationalize that art with a little bit of science that enables them to make better decisions. And I've seen companies that have done that, have provided a merchant or a sales rep with, hey, the last time one company said, we're going to blow the doors off. That their salespeople routinely use this term. The last time you said blow the doors off, sales went up 20%, not the predicted 75%. So now we know blow the doors off means 20%. So what that recognition can do is either allow the awareness of the people in their respective roles to understand their internal or inherent or personal biases, or allows a system to rationalize those biases as well by literally forecasting the forecast of the participant. So I've seen that be very, very successful as well. What we really need to do is have a process that mitigates the various biases of the people, that provides more data to those people, and provides greater insight into not only the forecast, but also the resulting plan, because often when people see, if you do X, it means Y, they rethink X and understand that, you know, if I say sales are going to go up by 75%, that means inventory is going to go up by 40%. And if I don't hit my number, then somebody is going to come back to me and give me a suggestion. So accountability becomes a big part of the process, and accountability is absolutely requires analytics to be able to, and a collaborative environment to be able to provide.
So it all comes down to art and science.
That's right.
So with most things
Yeah,
these days.
it's all math.
All right. So then we asked, what were the most strategic capabilities in respondents' inventory planning and optimization solutions? Of those surveyed, 39% said having rich analytical capability in their inventory planning and optimization solutions was the most important aspect in their forecasting processes.
Mm-hmm.
Others were looking for customer insights, about 26%, and automation at 20% in order to improve inventory management. So when we look at this, most valuable strategic capabilities, you know, people looking for rich analytical capabilities, customer insights, automation. What are the main takeaways there, Greg?
So there's this terminology, I don't know if it was created by Gartner, but it is certainly promoted by Gartner, the Technology and Supply Chain Analyst Group, called algorithmic planning. And algorithmic planning, in layman's terms, is simply representing your supply chain environment, its business rules, the likely exceptions, and the interactions with your supply chain partners inside of a technology, and then solving for that. So, you know, what I see when I look at these metrics is that many of these don't provide an answer. They simply provide greater insight to allow a human being to make the answer. And where technology really needs to go to be able to create an effective planning environment and an effective solution is to provide an answer. The math exists, the knowledge of the supply chain environment and business rules exists, and we just need a solver to present at least the most rational solution, recognizing all of the input data. Rich analytical capability and customer insights, really, to me, that means, I can see some people are probably chuckling out there, that just means a report that I have to discern what to do. Automation should consist of all of that rich analytical capability, the customer insights, and the collaboration tools to provide me with an answer, or at least a framework, that if I know something that the data doesn't represent and the business rules don't reflect, then and only then do I intervene in the decision.
That's good stuff. So here's a big one, right? What percentage of demand couldn't be fulfilled from on-hand inventory? Most companies measure success by customer service and inventory turns, but these don't go far enough to get to the underlying causes of the issues. Additional metrics need to be incorporated, and companies should be diligent in examining how well forecasting models are working. Many are overriding the statistical forecasts with their gut feelings about inventory management when they should be paying attention to forecasting accuracy. Greg, and I know this differs by industry, but with 46% of the respondents reporting they couldn't fulfill demand more than 2% of the time, is this concerning, and what are the implications there?
It is concerning, but let me take the two smaller numbers that are even more concerning first, and then come back to that. Because if you don't know whether we're fulfilling, you can't improve.
That's 14%.
That's a large portion of the marketplace out there. And that means that they don't have an adequate or well-defined metric for understanding that. As concerning, and I see this frequently, is those companies that always have the quantity. That might as well say always overstocked.
So you're saying nobody's perfect.
What I'm saying is that there is a very delicate balance
Right.
between performing at a high level without a high level of inventory. Right. You have to be able to do both. And, you know, to go back to your question, the 46%, in almost no industry is a 96% or lower first pass fill rate acceptable. I came from a hard goods industry, get the job done. It might be a part that only fit one car or only a half dozen or hundreds of cars on the planet. And we performed at a much, much higher level than that. If we were not hitting 98%, we were exceedingly unhappy. So you need to be able to perform at that higher level. And again, you have to forecast effectively. I think everyone knows that, but you have to also have the planning capability that allows you to compensate for that ultimate forecast error, again, considering that supply chain, and actually target the number, not target the service goal, not target an inventory number. A good solution, algorithmic planning, in fact, would state that you should be able to say, I want to hit a 98.1% inventory first pass fill rate, and then your system should be able to back into the right amount of inventory to be able to do that. The math, again, the math is there. A goal-oriented solution will work backwards. And I think what we have done, I know I did for decades, what we have done for so long is we've said, throw some more inventory at it and let's see if that gets us to 96%. We know the variability of demand. We know the volatility of supply. We know the length of our lead times and how often we purchase. Putting those and other factors into a solution gives us the ability to work backwards into, this is how much inventory I need in order to hit these targets.
Deal. So, you know, I guess that 14% that didn't know, this kind of leads into here, right? You know, because supply chain measurement is always a big topic of conversation.
Yeah.
So we asked respondents how they measured their supply chain planning and inventory optimization success. Customer service levels was the top metric, with almost 83% of those surveyed saying they pay attention to it. That was followed by inventory turns at almost 76% and days of supply on hand at 62%. So Greg, in your experience working with leading wholesalers and distributors, what measurement factors and processes seem to work the best? And part two of the question, is there a one-size-fits-all approach to measurement?
I wish there were a one-size-fits-all approach, but industries are so different. The industry I just described, automotive distribution, very slow-moving product, much like other hard goods industries. And then you've got the food industries where the product is very, very fast-moving, but service levels are even more important. So where we were targeting 98 plus service levels, anything below 99.5% first pass fill rate in a food industry is atrocious.
Not good, right?
Totally unacceptable. So, but at the same time, you have to turn the inventory very quickly in a food industry because the margins are tight. Margins are higher in hard goods industry. So you can see why there's no one size fits all. You know, what I think happens is that too many companies try to run their business by one of these metrics. And what you've got to do is really put, I think, the top two are appropriately the top two. The top two should drive any of the other metrics.
Right.
You want to turn your inventory as rapidly as possible without jeopardizing your target service level. And both of those need to be segmented. Your fastest moving items, while generally lower profit, are the ones that drive footsteps in the door, so you want to service them very well. At the same time, because they're lower profit, you want to turn them very quickly. So you need to be able to do that. There are systems that are able to do that. It is very difficult to do from a manual perspective. The one thing that companies must do is they must have a technology that facilitates that. I've tried it. I bet a lot of people that are listening to us right now have tried it. It is a very difficult balance to
Right.
strike, virtually impossible for a human.
Right. So don't leave us yet. We're going to get back into Q&A. So you see, we're going to reiterate the key findings here and kind of wrap it all up. But we will go to Q&A. So I don't want to lose anybody. But so to reiterate the key findings, we found out that increasingly complex demand patterns are causing firms to hold more inventory, and that's not translating into increased customer service. We found out that many companies continue to struggle with how to forecast and manage promotions. We also determined that forecasting techniques most commonly used by wholesalers are often outdated and lack integration of more advanced data analytics. And last but not least, wholesalers and distributors continue to struggle with cross-departmental collaboration. And then, I'd add to that reporting mechanism as well.
Yeah.
So Greg, after taking in all this survey data, all of it combined together, what is the one thing that wholesalers and distributors should start doing today when they get off the phone today that they currently might not be doing?
They almost universally are not doing analyzing the why of demand. And as I said before, analyze those customer transactions to determine the why of demand. Was it because we gave them a special price? Was it because we really hit it hard with the field sales force? Did our supplier brand help us promote the goods? Was there some social or advertising or customer sentiment factor that drove demand to that? Understand and segment that out and make that part of your analysis and forecast. So if you to understand the why, again, I encourage you strongly to analyze your customer transactions and figure that why out and make that a portion of your forecast, so that when that why is not present this same time next year, you know that you shouldn't expect that portion of demand to occur. That will allow you to align inventory, have a more accurate forecast, and overall be able to meet the two targets that most companies want to meet: first pass service level and inventory turns.
So at 3:01 today, Eastern time, everyone is figuring out the why of demand.
That's right.
There we go.
Why? So
we said there wasn't going to be a commercial, and there's not, before we get to the Q&A. But if you're having trouble what we talked about today, then, of course, there's Blue Ridge. Blue Ridge Supply Chain Solutions is the most accurate way for wholesalers and distributors to spot changes in customer demand before they happen. And traditional forecasting and planning solutions just weren't designed to keep up with today's increasingly unpredictable consumer behavior, just what we talked about all day today, all those factors and influences. And in a world where the only constant is change, Blue Ridge provides more certainty, more speed, and more assurance, so companies see the why behind the buy, right back there, and respond faster to the unexpected. That's why we're recognized as a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for supply chain planning. So Greg, we've got this more foreseeable future here, and talk to us about this quick graphic here for a second.
Yeah. So look, this solution wouldn't exist, as would not other solutions, if the traditional solutions were doing the job. And people wouldn't be interested in this discussion if the traditional solutions weren't doing the job. So we've got to stop postcasting, right? We've got to analyze the customer. We've got to understand their whys, and those whys could be any of those cute little icons at the top. It's the time of the year. It could be the weather. It's because the product is new and they're excited about it and that sort of thing. And we've got to start looking forward. We've got to start looking forward with our forecast, not looking backward to create a forecast. And we've got to enable a plan that contains enough of the business rules and the supply chain environment to allow us to effectively plan and look at something that is going to actually happen. I mean, some companies today, they're planning, including things like how many truckloads will I buy in the next week, or how many times will I hit or miss my vendor minimum in the next week or month or 6 months or year. So that kind of precision really changes the game for companies. It enables that collaboration that's missing today, right? It compensates for the volatility in the marketplace. It creates a better forecast, and it allows companies to make a lot more money and be a lot more effective with a lot less manual effort and intervention.
Giving them the more certainty, speed, and assurance.
There you go.
All right, so enough with our commercial there, but we had to put that in there. So real quick, we've got some questions here. All right, Greg, this is coming from Rob. If stochastic forecasting isn't the answer, what do you think the best forecasting technique is?
Well, so the best way to forecast is to use causal techniques first. Again, that why of demand. And if we can't classify the demand as to why it occurs, then we dump it into the stochastic bucket, and that simply becomes a segment of the forecast, not the foundation of the forecast. A lot of people will say that the stochastic part is the foundation. I like to think of it as the sludge left over at the bottom. If we can't identify why demand happened, causal, or that it's going to happen with high certainty, right, which is deterministic demand, then we dump it into this bucket of sludge and try and make a decent average out of it. But layer on top of that the deterministic portion of the forecast and the causal portion of the forecast. It gives us more certainty as to what demand is going to be.
That's good.
So a segmented forecast, I guess, is the bottom line.
So this is coming from Laura. How do you see, and then we kind of talked about it, how do you see companies effectively competing against Amazon? How are they doing it today?
Yeah.
I mean, this is great information,
Yep.
right? But
yeah. Well, the way I see companies competing against Amazon is in some cases being part of the Amazon environment. So some time back, I wrote this article called Enemies with Benefits. And it is the reality that Amazon has the largest marketplace, at least in North America. And to exclude yourself from participating in that is folly. So you should participate in that, enemies close, right? Friends close, enemies closer. You should participate in that. You should have your own drive into the marketplace, both from an e-commerce and a direct commerce standpoint. You should identify what your niche is in the marketplace and capitalize on that.
So it's a little bit of co-opetition, though.
Hey, I mean, look, if you take on a segment, I've seen it happen 2 times in the last 6 months. If you take on a segment that Amazon does not have expertise in, like our HVAC distributor friends, they might just buy you for a multiple of what you're worth, right?
Right.
So, there is a lot of opportunity out there to compete with them. So.
All right, so this is from Jim. We've got a housekeeping question here. Will the report be available after the webinar? For everybody that attended today, we'll get that out to you. Midday tomorrow with some additional information as well. Then we've got a question here from Gail. Gail asked, what information should be captured at the time of transaction that will help determine the why?
Yeah, everything you can possibly get. Let me narrow that down because that sounds really amorphous. But was the item promoted is a great one. What was the weather like, or how did the weather change is good to know. Any knowledge you have about the promotions that might have impacted the customer. So for instance, if someone comes to your e-commerce, if you enable e-commerce in your distributorship, if someone comes to your e-commerce site, you can trace where they came from. You can even trace the ads and whatnot that they passed on the way. If you can capture those give you the ability to analyze that using correlative techniques. Any of those things that could have influenced the customer in getting to the transaction with you. The example that I gave earlier, the candy distributor, were they promoting the goods? Was there a big building boom near one of their stores, and that's why Home Depot was selling the heck out of Snickers bars, whatever it was, right? Whatever intelligence you can gather about the transaction is really good. Time of day, affinity, if you know their account number, start analyzing patterns of that customer. I'll tell you, particularly in distribution, this is much more effective to do than in retail. Analyze the specific customer. Why does this customer go months without buying something from me, and then all of a sudden they want 50 of item X? That is an often asked question in distribution, and it's more easily answered by capturing that transaction and knowing when it happened, and possibly even physically going back to that customer and asking why.
Right.
I've seen companies do it to great effect.
Well, good deal. Well, thanks everybody for attending the webinar. Our goal is to make this.
Good questions, right?
Good stuff. And we've got some more. We've gone about 50 minutes. We'll answer those via email, and we'll get back to everybody whose questions weren't answered. But our goal is to make this report an annual report. So in about 6 months, we'll relaunch the 2019 version, and we'll make sure you're on the survey list. It's kind of scary how time flies that we 6 months from now doing this again. But Greg, thanks for joining. As always, your insights are great, and we appreciate your time. So thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and come visit us at blueridgeglobal.com.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks everybody.